Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I started the night like I started every night, by inventorying the trunk of my hatchback and telling myself I'd be off the road before the train stopped running. The car was a 10-year-old Honda Fit, the color of a blue recycling bin, with a dent on the rear quarter panel and a stubborn rattle somewhere under the dash that disappeared only when the heater fan was on low. My insulated delivery bag was clean and zipped, straps checked, ice packs frozen solid inside a cooler for the occasional grocery run. I kept a clipboard with extra pens, a roll of blue painter's tape for sealing soup lid, and a box of disposable gloves because kitchens loved me more when I didn't touch anything bare-handed. In the spare tire well, jumper cables, a reflective triangle, a small first aid kit, a heavy Maglite, a pry bar I used for stuck wooden gates, and a roadside fire extinguisher. It wasn't an arsenal, it was a courier's tool roll. The map in my head woke up as soon as the ignition caught. Milwaukee to California, California, south to Armitage, cut through Logan Square, where the roundabout always forced timid drivers to second-guess themselves, then back to North Avenue if things looked light. I knew how the city breathed. When the lights along Damon ran green like dominoes, when the Kennedy stalled for no reason, when a lane closure somewhere on Wacker backed the river bridges for 30 minutes, when a single stalled truck on Lakeshore Drive turned the shoreline into a parking lot. I didn't need GPS. The grid was printed behind my eyes. People think food delivery is an afterthought, something that happens around their evening plans. For me, it was a 12-hour shift of choreography and small bets. I bet on where the next surge would spike. I bet on which kitchens packed carefully and which ones sent soup in thin containers that popped like water balloons. I bet on how long an elevator took to arrive in a 20-story building with 3 broken call buttons. I bet on whether the person who wrote "Leave at door" would actually be waiting behind it, grateful, or call 30 minutes later to say they didn't see it. And every night, there were a few moments when you felt the city tap you on the shoulder and say, "Not tonight, kid. Try again." At 9:42 p.m., my phone chimed twice. One ping from the app with a stacked order at a ramen shop on Armitage, and one from the city's alert system, SAMAS, WEA, whatever the acronym of the week was, white text on a black banner, the kind you can't swipe away. Emergency message, public health incident. Avoid non-essential travel, shelter indoors. The second line had a timestamp and a callback code to the Office of Emergency Management and Communications, which meant it was serious enough that someone at OEMC had turned a key in a panel downtown. Around here, emergency message could mean anything from a chemical spill on the South Branch to a missing kid to a tornado warning that would pass in 10 quiet minutes. But radio stations were talking over one another, and my phone pushed a second alert a few minutes later that used unfamiliar wording. Localized outbreak. Symptoms progress rapidly. Do not approach symptomatic individuals. I thought of flu seasons, of panics that swelled and then settled. I thought of tips that paid rent. I accepted the ramen order and pulled under the shop's awning where the smell of broth seeped out the door and into my clothes. Inside, Harold, the line cook with a bandana tied pirate style over his hair, was ladling pork broth into bowls and capping them with precision. He'd been a paramedic once, he told me, before the schedules ground him down and he found peace in prep lists and the rhythm of burners. "You see that alert?" he asked, hands moving fast. "Twice," I said. "Any idea?" He tapped a laminated card on the wall that listed cooling temperatures and safe-holding times. "Wife works nights at the hospital. She texted me, said it's busy, that's all I know." "You worried?" "Always," he said with a quick smile. but we keep cooking until someone says stop. I left with 2 bags, double wrapped, receipts taped neatly. The first drop was a 3rd-floor walk-up on Medill with a brick stoop worn smooth where thousands of shoes had scuffed it. The customer had typed, "Please no ringing, dog sleeping," so I left the bag on a chair by the door and texted a photo. The second was a newer building with an elevator and a doorman named Sergey who liked crosswords and soccer, and told me, in a whisper meant to Carrie, that the evening had been strange. People running, people asking to use the restroom in the lobby, which was against the rules. He'd locked the bathrooms and checked that the back door had the horizontal panic bar engaged. On my way back to the car, the air tasted like static. A police SUV slid past, lights off, moving faster than you ever see a police car move without its light bar. At the intersection, the traffic signal on Armitage flickered, sputtered, and went dark, leaving 4 directions of drivers to interpret their own ethics. A horn blared. Another car crept through the cross like a mouse slipping past a sleeping cat. I drove toward Bucktown for a grocery run. A couple gallons of distilled water, a bag of oranges, a pack of batteries, and that's when the 3rd alert hit. This one was longer, with the kind of specific advice that comes only once you've admitted everything's already broken. Avoid groups, secure doors. If you see aggressive individuals, keep distance. Do not wait for assistance. It read like something drafted months ago for a different scenario and pasted into tonight. The grocery store was closing early, a manager apologizing as she locked the sliding doors with a key that took 3 attempts to turn. "Corporate says close," she said through the glass, shrugging at the line of people who'd come for snacks or laundry soap or just to be under bright lights with other bodies. I turned back to the app and took a quick apartment-to-apartment courier job. A bag of medicine from one building to another less than a mile away. It was labeled for a D. Park, RN, a nurse, who'd left a note that made my ribs tighten. "Can't leave right now," it read. Please hurry, please knock twice." There was a tip attached that made my eyes widen, enough to pay for half a week's groceries, enough to feel like someone shouting from a window when the fire truck hadn't arrived. Her address was a brick mid-rise with balconies that looked west toward the trail of lights along the lanes of the Kennedy. On the way, I rolled past a line of city trucks that had stopped nose to tail in the middle of Damen Avenue. Workers were hauling orange, water-filled barricades off flatbeds, the kind you roll into place and fill from a hydrant so they're too heavy to move. In the glow of their work lamps, the barriers looked like giant toy bricks. They set them on the cross streets, staggered so a fire truck could slalom through but a sedan couldn't. A cop wearing a reflective vest pointed at something on his shoulder mic and drew a finger across his throat, the universal "We're done here." A firefighter in turnout gear rolled a length of hose back into a loop, neat as rope on a sailboat, and I realized the blockades weren't for a parade or a film shoot. They were closing the neighborhood. At D. Park's building, I set my shoulders and went inside. The lobby smelled like lemon cleaner and late-night takeout. Mailboxes lined the wall, and next to them a paper flyer with tabloids' exclamation points. "Keep doors locked tonight. Do not let strangers in." The kind of reminder that assumes everyone is reliable right up until they press the buzzer and ask to come in. The elevator waited, with its doors open like a mouth. I rode to the 8th floor, got out into a quiet hallway with gray carpet and doors that absorbed sound. I found 8D. The peephole's lens glinted slightly in the hall light. I knocked twice because she'd asked. Nothing. I knocked again, louder. "Delivery," I said. "From, next building." I didn't want to say the app's name out loud because it felt like an incantation from the old world. Behind the door, a sound. Not the shuffle of feet. Not the mechanical hum of a deadbolt. Something like breath too close to wood. A soft exhale and a tap as if someone's forehead had come to rest against the panel. I waited, listening, feeling the fine hairs on my arms lift. Dana? I tried, because that's what D. Park might have stood for. Nurse Park. I have... A thud cut me off, heavy and sudden, loud enough to vibrate down my arm through the door. Another thud, higher up, the sound of a shoulder thrown into wood. The peephole blacked out. I took a step back. My throat tightened around a word I didn't say. Dana, I'm leaving the bag here, I said, and placed it gently on the floor against the jamb. I'm going to call for help. The elevator chimed at the end of the hall, doors opening on their own. Nobody stepped out. The light inside the car flickered. I walked backward 3 steps, keeping the door in my peripheral vision. Another thud. A wet rasp that didn't sound like a cough, but like someone trying to clear something that wouldn't clear. I reached the elevator, stepped in, and pressed L for lobby and 1 for the second set of doors, the way you do when you want the car to move faster out of superstition. On the ground floor, my signal was strong. 3 bars of LTE, and I dialed 911. A recorded voice informed me that all operators were assisting other callers. Please hold. A loop of piano music. A soft click that might have been an operator's line opening and closing elsewhere. I waited 2 minutes, 3, listening to my heart click like a fountain pen. Finally, a voice. 911. What's the location of your emergency? I gave the address and the apartment number. Possible medical emergency, I said, because that was neutral and accurate. Patient might be alone. Nurse. She requested. I stopped, because I didn't want to say that she had requested courage, or company, or a promise nobody could keep. We have multiple incidents in the area, the dispatcher said. I could hear keyboards in the background, other voices, the faint echo that comes when a room is too big for its work. If the patient is mobile, advise them to shelter in place. If not mobile, stay clear of the area. Can you send someone? Units are responding as available, she said, which in dispatch dialect meant, no, not now, maybe not ever. What should I do? I asked, and hated how small my voice sounded. Do not attempt to enter, she said. If you observe aggressive behavior, leave immediately. Do not engage. The city will send notifications when it is safe to move. I thanked her because I was raised to thank people who were trying. Then I hung up and stood in the lobby a moment, listening to the building breathe. The radiator ticked gently. Something in the stairwell shifted. A small sound that repeated like a person testing a door. The building's exterior door was a solid slab with a panic bar inside. I checked it, then locked the vestibule door behind me before stepping out into air that felt electric. On the street, the grid was fraying. Traffic lights had begun to fail in patterns. 3 blocks dark, 1 block working, like the city was blinking and missing beats. Cars piled up in 4-way standoffs while drivers made brave decisions. A city salt truck rolled the wrong way down a 1-way side street, its yellow strobes stuttering across brick. A woman in scrubs jogged along the sidewalk with a tote bag bouncing against her hip, the pockets of her jacket a constellation of ID badges and small tools. I wanted to ask if she was D. Park, if she knew who was behind 8D's door, but the look on her face said, keep your questions. I only have room for forward. As I pulled away, my phone vibrated with a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was short. You left the bag. Thank you. The message had a little heart at the end and the kind of urgency you don't dress up. I typed back, stay safe, and started a new message to 911 with the apartment number and the word confirmed, then erased it, realizing that words wouldn't bring anyone faster. While I debated my next move, the app chimed with a large order. 7 bags from a late-night taqueria on Western headed to a high-rise near the lake. The tip flashed like a dare. My instincts said stay west where the streets were wider and the power failures patchy. The lakefront, with its high-rises and aging power feed, could go dark like a switch thrown. But my instincts also said money was money until it wasn't. I told myself I'd make one more run and then head home, south and west. 4 turns and a bridge to the small 2-flat where I rented a garden apartment that flooded only during the kind of storms we got 3 times a year now. I told myself I'd take the orders, ride the green waves where lights still worked, cut east on Armitage, south on Halstead, east on North Avenue, then Lakeshore Drive for a sprint past the zoo and the museum campus. I did not make it to the lake. The closures thickened. At the next major intersection, sawhorses stood in the lanes and a police cruiser idled sideways. An officer in a winter hat motioned traffic to turn, his other hand up to his radio, the cable from his mic curving over his shoulder like a question mark. I swung down a side street, then another, using my smaller car to slip between parked vehicles. The lights above Damen died in a strip, and the neighborhood went gray in an instant. In the windows of a second-floor apartment, a family clustered around a television that showed a talking head gesturing at a map. The sound was muted, but you didn't need sound to read fear on faces. At Wabansia, I slowed because a group of people were huddled in the crosswalk, dressed for bed in slippers and puffy jackets. A woman waved me down and asked if I had a phone charger. She held up an old phone with a screen brighter than her eyes. Her child clutched a stuffed dog, and the child's eyes were dry and enormous. I gave her a spare cable from the glove compartment and a cigarette lighter adapter and told her to keep them. She said that the power had gone out in her building and the stairs were crowded and someone had fallen and nobody could find the building supervisor. Her voice skittered over details like stones across a pond. I was about to tell her the location of a police station 3 blocks away when she shook her head and said they weren't letting anyone in, that a man at the door had said the lobby wasn't a shelter. We looked at each other for a few seconds that existed outside of the usual calendar. Then she said thank you again and passed the charger to the next person, and I kept moving because that was the only thing I knew how to do. At the end of the block, I saw the first one clearly. He stood in the mouth of an alley, half turned toward the sidewalk, as if he'd been distracted by something just out of view. His clothes were rumpled but not dirty, a work shirt untucked from slacks, sleeves rolled wrong as if by someone else's hands. His head moved in small, precise ticks like a bird's. When a car door slammed a block away, his chin lifted and he angled toward the sound, not with a startle, but a deliberate slide. He didn't lurch. He didn't moan. He listened. I'd seen people in distress, people high, people sick. This was different in a way that lit up every nerve behind my eyes. A man on a bike coasted past, boots skimming pavement, and the figure in the alley pivoted. He stepped out with a smoothness that made me think of dancers or cats. I rolled my windows up and kept them up, and when I eased into the next intersection, I checked my mirrors and saw the alley figure not rushing but adjusting, sliding across the mouth of the alley to let my taillights move out of his peripheral vision. It would have been almost graceful if it weren't absolutely wrong. The worse the grid got, the more my shortcuts mattered. I cut south on Levitt, hugging the parking lanes so I could swerve around anything abrupt, then west on Cortez, then south again along a strip of warehouses where the lights stayed bright because they had generators freighted on trailers humming snakes of exhaust into the air. I told myself that if I kept to the places I knew intimately, I could slip through the seams. That was the lie the city tells you, and you tell yourself back, you know me, I'll be kind. I stopped taking stacked orders and started taking any job that moved me south and west. Groceries for a housebound couple, a bag of dry dog food and a case of water for a guy with a basement apartment. a box of CPAP supplies to a third-floor walk-up where a man opened the door with a grateful, tired face that said he hadn't slept in hours. These were things I could do while the sirens braided overhead. These were things a courier could do while the big problems reshaped the map. At 11:06, the big problem became personal. I was on Chicago Avenue near the Pulaski Park Fieldhouse, where the 2-story red brick building has a tiled roof and a stone arch over the entrance that looks like a small castle. The field was dark except for a single maintenance light in a corner. My route took me past a cluster of apartments where the windows showed flickers of television blue. I saw a woman leaning over a balcony railing, looking down, phone held to her ear. I saw a man on the sidewalk below, knocking at the locked gate to the courtyard, his knuckles hitting metal with a steady rhythm that didn't waver. It would have been easy to misread him. He wasn't flailing or shouting. He was measured. He knocked, and his head tilted toward the sound of his own hand like he was tasting it. The woman on the balcony whispered something into her phone and then called down very softly, "Please go," which told me everything about how much noise they thought was safe to make. Another man emerged from the shadows of the courtyard, eyes wide, and tried to unlatch the gate from inside, but the key was missing from the lockbox, and the hook and eye above the latch had been kicked one too many times and bent. The man outside heard the movement and tried to push the gate open from his side with a quick, fluid motion that used a shoulder, a hip, a twist that wasn't practiced but was precise. The metal held. He stepped back, not surprised, and he listened again, as if waiting for the courtyard to tell him which angle to take next. My heart hammered. I knew that courtyard from a dozen pickups. I knew the way the latch stuck on humid days. I knew the daily delivery of bottled water stacked just inside for the building super. I knew the fire door in the back alley that opened if you pushed the bar too hard and tripped a hissy little alarm that nobody could hear 2 buildings away. That knowledge felt like a tool and a trap at the same time. I put the car in park and got out. The air had that crisp edge of early fall, not cold enough to bite but cool enough to carry sound. I grabbed the Maglite from the passenger footwell and the pry bar from under the seat. They were tools. They were mine. "Hey," I said, softly but enough to be heard. The man at the gate turned his head, slow, considered, a camera on a swivel. I kept my voice even. "You're okay," I lied, because the lie might be a net. "You need a medic. There's a medic." I gestured in a vague direction because pointing would have made it explicit. "Down the block." He pivoted his attention to my hand as it moved, following the arc of my gesture. And I realized the truth that would keep me alive. They were learning to track signals. Not sirens, not just motion, signals. The noises we make when we are ourselves. The cadence of conversation. The footfalls that mean confidence or fear. The chirp a car makes when it locks. The click of a deadbolt. The sizzle of a stove. We were broadcasting familiarity, and familiarity was a beacon. I didn't flash the Maglite at his eyes because that would have started something. Instead, I stepped toward the gate and lifted the hook from the eye with the pry bar. The bent metal resisted, but the tool gave me leverage, and the hook popped free with a sound that felt like a shout. The man inside pulled the gate open just enough to slip, then closed it behind him, and I slid the hook back into place and bent it a little farther with the pry bar so it would hold. The outside man stepped forward again with that fluid certainty, and I said, "Go," to the inside man without looking at him, because names didn't matter and time didn't exist. I retreated to my car and got inside and locked the doors. I didn't start the engine. The key beeped, a tiny chirp that might as well have been a flare, and I flinched and held my breath. The man outside tilted his head, listening to that electronic bird. He took a step closer, then stopped, then looked left and right, and I watched the street teach him the shapes of opportunity. Behind him, deeper in the alley, shadow moved. Not one person, several. They didn't jostle, they didn't trip, they flowed. Side alleys were becoming their corridors. They were learning the city as quickly as I had, but from a different angle, where echoes carried, where brick softened sound, where a chain-link fence rattled like a warning. Their movement had none of the flailing you expect when you think of panic. It was practice, not panic. It was the practice of listening. I turned the key and the engine caught, and the outside man's head snapped toward me like a compass finding north. He stepped, 1, 2, then stopped as a bus roared a block away and his attention moved to that larger signal. He pivoted and glided toward the bus's direction, and I took my chance. Rolling away slowly, tires whispering, windows up, radio off, phone face down. The app offered me a hospital run, sealed samples from a clinic to a lab in the Illinois Medical District. The route was familiar, the money good, the sense of doing something useful a balm. I accepted and headed south toward the cluster of hospitals where lights never go off, where the sky is washed a permanent white from sodium vapor and hope. If there was order anywhere tonight, it would be there. Between here and there, the city changed again. The gridlocked intersections turned into stationary tableau. 4 vehicles stopped in a perfect X, their drivers gone, doors hanging open like flags. A sedan idled itself to sleep, its engine management system deciding to preserve itself. A delivery truck sat half on the curb with its rear door up and a smear of flour across the bumper like chalk. A bike lay on its side with a paper grocery bag next to it. Oranges spilled and rolling, their color too bright against the gray street. At Grand and Ashland, a barricade of water-filled barriers and a City of Chicago tanker truck formed a wall. A Department of Transportation crew worked with controlled speed, setting additional barriers, talking in clipped phrases over radios. One of them had a whistle. He blew it twice, short, and the rest of the crew moved in a pattern that said they'd practiced it 6 dozen times in a parking lot when the air was warm and mosquitoes were lazy. I rolled down my window and called, "Medical District?" because sometimes the right combination of words was a passport. The man with the whistle looked at me, at the logoless insulated bag in the passenger seat, at my hands on the wheel. "Stay west," he said, voice flat. "If you can go home, go home." "I have a pickup," I said, and held up my phone like an official document. He shook his head with a sympathy that wasn't quite pity. "Labs are closed," he said. "They're not receiving. If you have something critical, bring it to the blue tent at Damen and Polk." He pointed, and I could see the reflection of a tent in his safety glasses, a rectangle of emergency fabric lit from within, lines of people moving like code. "Thank you," I said, and he nodded once and blew his whistle again. Short, and 2 men slid a barrier into a new position and the road behind me shrank. I went south on Ashland, then east on Augusta, then worked my way to the medical district along streets I'd never used this late. The blue tent at Damen and Polk was real. A square of organized purpose where people in vests guided cars through lanes like planes on a tarmac. A woman at the entrance asked what I had, and when I said sealed samples, she said, "Leave them on that table," and pointed with a gloved hand. The table held a grid of plastic bins labeled with thick marker. Blood, swab, other. I put my parcel in other because it looked like it belonged next to the ambulance crew's cooler, and because I didn't trust myself to decide more than that. The woman gave me a sticker that said courier in block letters and told me, "When you finish, go home." I could have stopped there. I didn't. The app showed a call for a pickup on a 4th-floor apartment near the district. Food and bottled water for a woman listed as A. Kinsey, with a note that she worked nights in radiology and hadn't left the hospital in 30 hours. The building had its own courtyard, its own gate, its own set of stairwells that functioned as wells for sound. I knew the lock code because they hadn't changed it in months. Residents often forgot to request updates and supers often delayed them because the system required calling a number during business hours and waiting on hold for a technician in another city. My life ran on those delays. Tonight they felt like someone else's exposed wire. The courtyard was quiet. I moved slowly, keeping my eyes on the spots where the light and dark met. I adjusted the delivery bag on my shoulder so it wouldn't sway and knock against my hip. The air carried a smell like overheated electronics and hospital hand gel. In the stairwell, my footsteps sounded like announcements, so I put my shoes to the edges of each step, letting the rubber find quieter purchase. When I reached the 4th floor, I paused an extra second before the door, listening. The elevator at the end of the hall opened, empty, then closed again, a mechanical reflex. Kinsey's door had one of those tiny laser-printed labels next to the peephole that said in small uppercase letters radiology, which made me think of neat desk drawers. I knocked, and the door opened quickly, a chain still set. A young woman with tired eyes and a halo of curls peered out. "Thank you," she whispered, and I slid the bag through the gap and the chain slithered free and the door closed, the deadbolt turning with a practical click. Through the wood, she said, "They said we were staying late. Then they said we were staying. Then they said—" She took a breath and let it out. "You be careful." "You too," I said. "Please." I meant it in the old-fashioned way. On the way back to the stairwell, I heard something in the hallway behind me, soft and deliberate. I didn't speed up because speed is a sound. I stepped into the stairwell and let the door fall closed and didn't take the elevator because the elevator is a bell. Halfway down the stairs, a shape paused on the landing below. He looked up at me. His eyes registered me as a puzzle. He tilted his head to listen. Then a voice from the hallway above me, a man with a cell phone, said, "Hey, you okay?" And the shape's attention flowed past me and turned uphill toward the brighter sound. I held still and waited while the city tested the value of silence. Back in the car, my hands shook on the wheel. I set the Maglite on my lap and my pry bar in the door pocket. I took 3 slow breaths, counting the seconds in each inhale because numbers are anchors when the ground moves. The next hour had a rhythm I struggle to describe even now. The grid died in pockets and then in sheets. The big retail strips locked their rolling doors, and the chains clanked like drawbridges. The blocks around the hospitals filled with people on foot, moving slowly, moving toward bright tents and people in vests. West of Western, the houses went dark one by one, as if someone had breathed on a row of candles. The infected, if that word is precise enough for what moved, learned alley routes and the acoustics of mail slot doors, and the way sound traveled across courtyards at night. They learned to pause out of sight and listen for keys. They learned that a child's cry opened 3 doors at once. They learned because they had nothing else to do, and we, by being ourselves, taught them. I was not a hero. I was a courier who knew turn radii and which side of the street had unplowed ruts after a storm. But that knowledge mattered when the city's muscle memory failed. It mattered when a family stuck at a locked gate needed to know that the back alley opened to a parking lot with a sliding fence that the super never bothered to fix. It mattered when a woman afraid to walk down a long hallway could be guided to the service stairs that exited on a less obvious block. It mattered when the fire door in the rear had a magnetic hold open that released when the power failed, sealing the shortcut unless you knew the manual keyhole on the frame and had a thin screwdriver to turn it. I used my tools. The Maglite became a silent signal, kept low, pointed at my shoes, illuminating trip hazards and identifying my body to myself. The pry bar lifted hooks and nudged stuck latches. The fire extinguisher wasn't a weapon so much as a surprise in a can. A short burst into a hallway blinded and cooled and turned a smooth approach into careful steps for everyone, which sometimes was the difference between me getting past and not. When people asked where the police were, I said busy, because that was true. When they asked where help was, I said here, because sometimes the person standing with you is the only help you get. At 12:13 a.m., the 911 system stopped putting me on hold. Calls rang without answer. A recorded message said the queue was full. When the app pushed a pop-up that read "Citywide pause in effect, essential deliveries only," I tapped acknowledge because the other option was exit, and I didn't have anywhere better to exit to than my own small apartment, 4 miles away, through a city that was learning to be a different animal. I turned toward home. The route in my head was as familiar as my own hallway. Ogden to California, California to 26th, 26th to Sacramento, cut south to the block with the bakery that baked at night, and perfumed the entire street with a scent so good it made strangers lean out of car windows and smile. Then 2 more turns and a garage door that rolled up slowly and complained about humidity. I could do it with my eyes closed. I nearly did, because the darkness between working streetlights made the city feel underwater. Near the viaduct at Western, an overturned bucket truck blocked 2 lanes. Its inner compartment had spilled hardware, bolts and washers and steel clamps, across the roadway like gray gravel. The aerial boom lay crooked over the curb. I threaded the fit between the truck's rear bumper and a line of orange barrels, and rolled over the metal with tires that sounded suddenly fragile. On the far side of the viaduct, a group of neighbors had set up a battery-powered lantern in a circle on the pavement and were sitting on folding chairs quietly, as if it were a summer evening and the power outage was a picnic. One of them nodded to me as I passed, and I nodded back, and our acknowledgement felt like a vow to be human. I was 3 blocks from home when I realized I had a tail. In the rear view, a figure moved when I moved. He wasn't sprinting. He was matching my pace with a patience that was almost gentle. When I slowed to ease over a pothole I knew by heart. A crater left by a water main repair 2 winters ago, he slowed. When I sped up past the auto shop with the mural of a phoenix, he sped up. When I turned right onto my street, he didn't follow into the turn but cut across the corner through the alley, with a sureness that said he'd navigated it already, practicing patterns, mapping angles. I drove past my building. I could not let him see me stop. I couldn't lead him to a door my key matched. I went around the block and took a long route that would have made me laugh any other night, weaving past the elementary school and the community garden and the small park where kids played half-court basketball in July, under a streetlight that flickered like applause. The figure adjusted, always a block away, always close enough to care, never close enough to be simple. I parked 3 blocks away under a tree that could hide my car's profile. I killed the engine and sat without moving, counting 30 seconds, then 60. I cracked the door and listened. A train hummed on the elevated tracks not far away, a sound that comforted me because it was proof that some system somewhere was still doing its job. Crickets in a patch of weeds buzzed, a country sound misplaced. Somewhere, a glass bottle tipped and rolled on concrete, the long sound of a cylinder settling to stillness. I took the Maglite and the pry bar and the fire extinguisher and left the car unlocked, because breaking my own window tomorrow would be the stupidest injury to add tonight. I cut down a side alley I knew as intimately as my own hallway, avoiding the slick spots where dumpsters sometimes leaked, and the way a certain slab of concrete tilted up to catch toes. I moved slowly, shoulders loose, breaths measured. When I reached my building's back gate, I didn't open it. I listened to the air like a musician tuning. Silence can be a trap as much as a kindness. Tonight it was both. I heard the savor of my own breath, I heard a low sound 2 houses over, the mechanical hum of a chest freezer in a garage running on a small generator. I heard, faintly, the kind of whisper insulation makes when it expands as the night cools, and under that, I heard footsteps that weren't mine and weren't confident. They were deliberate. They were matching me. He was there, one parcel of shadow over from where I had chosen to be. I didn't move. I didn't speak. In the alley, a cat hopped onto a trash can lid and it clanged, and the figure shifted toward the noise. The cat hissed and scraped off the lid, and the figure's head tilted to chase a second signal, and I understood finally that this was going to be a new kind of city in the morning, if there was a morning. We had designed it around the assumption that our noises meant us, that our signals were ours. Now, the city had new readers. I circled the block again and came to my front door, keys ready. My building was a 2-flat from 100 years ago, with leaded glass that made sunlight into diamonds, with a vestibule that smelled of old wood and shoe polish. The foyer light still worked because the circuit fed from a line that traced an odd path through the block, and the transformer serving it had not tripped. That was the kind of luck you can't ask for. I went in, turned the deadbolt, slid the chain, and set the pry bar next to the door like a walking stick someone might borrow. I clicked off the foyer light and left the kitchen light on low. I sat at my table and placed the Maglite in line with the door. I set my phone face up and watched reflected light slide across the screen like slow water. I did not sleep. I listened to my building. I listened to my street. I heard neighbors' voices, brief, soft, not names, but syllables, like knots in a rope. I heard a woman laugh once, too loudly, and then cover her own mouth. I heard the cat from the alley jump onto a windowsill and tread a little hollow drum roll on cardboard. I heard footsteps pass by on the sidewalk, stop, then move on. Sometimes they paused, learning where to look in. My mind found small work. I wrote a list on paper because paper is a promise you make to tomorrow. Batteries, water, rice, charger banks, UV filter straw, over-the-door latch for the rear entrance, duct tape for the small vent panel next to the vestibule because the hinge squeaked, chalk to mark doors quietly. I wrote names: Harold at the ramen shop, Sergey at the desk, A. Kinsey in radiology, the woman at the courtyard who needed a charger, the driver on the scooter I'd waved at and never spoken to. The list turned into a map of loyalty I didn't know I had. Around 3 a.m., the city sent another alert: shelter in place, do not travel, limited response capacity. If you live here long enough, you develop a fluent cynicism for city bulletins. This one didn't feel like theater or cover. It felt like a hand on your shoulder saying stay. I stayed. I drank water and ate a granola bar, even though I wasn't hungry because fuel is fuel and hunger hides in adrenaline. I stretched my hands because they'd been clenched too long around tools. I stood and looked out my front window through the narrow slit between blinds, and the street was a picture of itself. Parked cars, trees, the pale glow of a streetlight 1 block over. Something moved, and then didn't. The city was breathing. When dawn came, it didn't come all at once, but like someone slowly raising a dimmer. Colors returned. Brick to brick, tree to tree, the gray of street to the darker gray of curb. The big shapes made sense again, which made the smaller movements easier to see. A figure stood across the street, looking at the row of houses like a person in a museum considering frames. He was neatly dressed, hair combed, a line worker heading to a shift that no longer existed. He tilted his head toward a sound I couldn't hear. He moved on, not quite aimless, not quite purposeful. He was waiting for signals, and the new day had fewer to offer, which made him drift. The morning would set a new pattern. The app would either remain paused or turn the city into an emergency exchange. The hospitals would either study, triage, adapt, or lock their doors in a way that broke hearts but saved rooms for those already inside. The blocks would either organize or fray. I gripped the Maglite and felt the knurling bite my palm. The light through the blinds striped the floor and my list on the table. I added a line at the bottom. No one is coming. Not because it was true in every sense, but because it was a good assumption to build around. If help arrived, if the sirens and the tents and the radios made a net again, great. But in the meantime, the only map I trusted was the one behind my eyes, and the only logistics I could plan were the ones I could carry. I set the Maglite down precisely parallel to the edge of the table, a small act of order in a night that had turned shapes to noise. I went to the sink and washed my hands and watched the water run clear and felt gratitude for pressure, for warmth. Then I filled 3 pitchers and set them aside because luck is borrowed, not owned. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I'd saved as Nurse 8D, though I had never given her my contact. Maybe she'd taken it from the app. Maybe she'd guessed digits from a screenshot. It read, "I heard them in the hall last night. Thank you for not knocking again." The message included a small smile and a small prayer in text shape. Simple characters that carried a weight paper can't. I typed back, "If you can, wedge a chair under the knob. Put tape over the peephole. Stay quiet." I was careful with every verb. I did not tell her to move. I did not tell her to wait. I gave her the few small, practical things I understood. I drew the blinds and sat with my back to the wall, facing the door. The city outside shifted into daytime survival. Joggers turned into lookouts. Cafe lines into neighborhood committees. The hum of traffic into a tide chart of where not to be. On the hour, at least for the first few hours, fire engines rolled slowly down major streets with loudspeakers repeating messages in English and Spanish. Stay inside. Keep doors secured. Report fires and immediate medical emergencies. It wasn't a promise that help would arrive. It was a reminder that we were still connected by a mesh of intention, if not action. Around noon, my upstairs neighbor, Mr. Kumar, a retired math teacher with a habit of humming as if he were always solving a proof, slipped a note under my door. It read, in neat script, "I have a portable radio, channel 1, police quiet. Channel 2, fire active. If you need to come up, knock 3 times, then once." The code felt old-fashioned and perfect. I wrote back, "I have water and a flashlight. If we need to move, go out back, left, fence gap behind the lilac. Not the alley. The alley is learning us." I signed it with my name because names mattered, and slipped it under his door. By afternoon, the app had a new banner, Community Support Mode. It wasn't orders anymore. It was a list of places to drop supplies. A school gym open as a daytime respite. A clinic collecting blankets. A corner store giving away bread while it lasted. The city was repurposing the last-mile network for something human. They knew my car. They knew my habits. They trusted me to carry small things that mattered. I considered it, then laid the phone face down again. The night had taught me the value of quiet. I would move when the street said move. When I finally did rise, late in the day when the sun turned the bricks warm again, I gathered a small backpack, first aid kit, energy bars, bottled water, gloves, painter's tape, a roll of gauze, a carbon filter bottle, a multi-tool. I added the Maglite and clipped the pry bar to the outside with a carabiner because tools in hand are faster than tools in idea. I slung the fire extinguisher by its strap and practiced lifting it without clanging metal against metal. I slid my shoes back on and looped their laces twice so they wouldn't flop and sing my position on concrete. I opened the door and listened. The hallway sounded like the inside of a seashell, hollow with distant noise. I locked the door behind me and went up, 3 steps at a time. Soft, then medium, then soft again. A pattern that wouldn't stick in air. Mr. Kumar opened his door at my quiet knock, and, for a moment, we looked like two people in a play deciding whether to step on stage. "Afternoon," he said, as if I'd come to borrow sugar. "Afternoon," I said, like I had. His portable radio sat on his table next to a small plate of crackers and a neat glass of water. His apartment smelled like cardamom and books. "Channel 2?" I asked. He turned the dial. A dispatcher's voice came through, steady and tired and focused. "Engine 61, respond to small fire in alley, 2100 block, power line down." Another voice acknowledged, clipped. The net still held in places, and those places were brighter than their wattage. "We'll be all right," he said. It was neither promise nor prophecy. It was a math teacher's assessment of knowns and unknowns. We faced the doors and listened to the city speak in signals, and we added our own small signals to the mesh. The code of knocks, the tape on a peephole, the quiet of shoes on edges of stairs. We did not expect cavalry. We expected ourselves. That first night taught me more about the city than a decade of deliveries. It taught me that alleys remember footsteps, that buildings amplify certain sounds and swallow others, that a gate hook bent just so can hold back a wrong kind of patience, that a flashlight used low can keep you human, that some people in a crisis will try to make their humanity smaller so it doesn't attract attention, and others will make it bigger so someone can see it from far away. I was a delivery driver the night the virus shut the city down. I knew the grid better than most, and it still almost wasn't enough. But it was something. And in the new city, the one that breathes differently, the one that listens for us, we will have to be careful with our signals. We will have to choose what we broadcast. We will have to learn new routes that don't exist on any map. When the second night came, I laced my shoes tighter. I checked the weight of the Maglite in my hand and the quiet of the pry bar at my hip. I looked out at the block and saw shapes that were neighbors and shapes that were not, and I stepped into the hallway with my key between two fingers, not as a weapon, but as a reminder that home was a place I could still open. The city was waiting. It was learning us. We would have to learn it back. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.